Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're watching us. Thanks for being here and welcome to our bi-weekly Arts Insights Live. My name is Nagam Weeby, President of Arts Consulting Group, and I'm glad to be your host. And actually, we're going to have a conversation today. It's not a Q&A, but whether you've been with us from the start or you're joining for the first time, thank you for being here. Say hello in the comments. Let us know from where you're joining us. And also throughout the conversation, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments below in the chat, and we'll make sure to look at that during the conversation. So today's conversation is about executive success during leadership transitions. We know leadership transitions are some of the most consequential moments in the life of any organizations. They touch strategy, culture, governance, staff confidence, and ultimately an organization's ability to deliver on its mission. But then some organizations treat them, or we still look at them sometimes, as a single event, which is like hiring this new person. So today we're asking what happens before and after that decision, and what the data actually says determines whether a transition succeeds. So that question is really what brought us to today's conversation. It was built on the Leadership Transition Survey that Arts Consulting Group ran together with, CKF Collective this spring. We have a small sample. It's about 400 responses from CEOs and executive directors to board members and everyone in between. But we decided today to reopen the survey. So you're going to have the link today, and we're going to keep it open till the end of August to get a bigger sample. For today, we're just going to look at what we have so far as preliminary results and talk about what we're learning. I'm excited about the person who's going to be talking with me about this data today. I'm going to be joined by Courtney Ford. She's the CEO of CKF Collective and an ACG collaborator. I'm excited to announce that we're going to have a lot of partnership together on programs even to come beyond this survey. Courtney, welcome.
And Nagam, thank you so much for having me. I really want to begin with gratitude because, you took a leap with me before I even knew what this research was going to reveal. So I'm excited to be here and talk about the National Action Research Study that I've been conducting and kind of share some early insights with the field.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, the survey is the one we collaborated on, but Courtney also did some qualitative research with some interviews before the survey launched and during the survey. And those are completed at this point, right, Courtney?
Correct. Yeah. Awesome. So, you talked about how important these moments are of like choosing the right leader. And I think what I would add to that is, sector wide, we're experiencing one of the largest waves of executive leadership transitions in recent memory, right? So with the boomers retiring, there's a lot of seats becoming open while simultaneously so much is happening, right? Like we're navigating business model changes, financial uncertainty, union and workforce issues. So there's just a lot happening in this space. I think leadership transitions have always mattered, but today they matter even more.
Yeah, and even a recent research showed that the highest CEO's exit has been in the 2025 and nonprofit sector overall. But in addition to that, like there's a lot of evolution in the arts and culture sector. There's a lot of changes. So it's not even... There's so many layers and complexity. But before we dig deeper into more of the results we hear and our thoughts about it, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I mean, you started talking a little bit where that question came about, but maybe share a little bit more. How did this come about?
Yeah. So, my research is really all about what helps leaders and the organizations that they inherit actually thrive during these moments. So, in addition to our survey, I've spoken with nearly 70 CEOs, executive directors, board members, funders, and executive search professionals from across the country to really better understand these conditions. And, I want to acknowledge that this work has been guided by a really extraordinary advisory committee, including Dr. Ana Maria Correa and Dr. Antonio Kyler, who I know are with us today, along with Emil Kang and Kaz Pinkard. And I'm deeply grateful not only to them, but to the 70 people who, help me peel back behind the curtain and really understand what happens in these search committees and how decisions are actually made. So I'm very grateful for the generosity and candor that they led their voices to this work. And, you asked why this work was important to me. And I think I want to hear the same from you, Nagam, but I think for me, it's deeply personal. I've spent my career inside large nonprofit and cultural institutions. So I've witnessed being part of these transitions firsthand and acknowledge that I bring a very specific lens to this work. I identify as a first generation college graduate from Appalachia. Where I'm from, people call it Pennsyltucky. Which probably gives you a sense of the place. And, I think looking back, I often feel just wonder and immense gratitude. Like, how did this little girl from Butler, Pennsylvania, who's, my grandmother only graduated from the 5th grade, like, how did she go on to advise and lead some of the most prominent arts and culture institutions in the country? And as much as I would like to think that had to do with my own hard work and competence, and I'm sure that played a role, but I think what actually got me there was sponsorship. People who opened doors for me, people who recommended me, people who said my name in rooms that I didn't have access to. And I keep thinking about this question, like, who are we imagining into leadership? I think that's one of the most important leadership questions we can be asking ourselves right now. So I'm clearly not a neutral observer or researcher. Today I work as an advisor and executive coach, but really wanted to do this research to understand, not just how do we support individual leaders or individual organizations, but like, what would field change at scale look like to help meet this, leadership crisis that we're finding ourselves in. But I'm curious, what prompted you to say yes when I reached out to connect?
Well, I just want to start with the last question you said, because it's not only about the question we were having as individuals or even us as a firm. It's a sector-wide question right now. Like, what does leadership look like?
Yep.
What does successful transition look like? How are we setting up new leaders for success? What can we do to make it a smoother journey? Like, does it have to be that difficult and that traumatic or hard? Does it have to be that way? I don't know, but I'm optimistic that there should be some other way. It doesn't have to be that way. For me specifically, I became president of ACG. It's going to be almost a year in October, but ACG has been for 29 years in August, doing executive search, doing interim management, planning and capacity building. Like, it's a firm that sits at the center of the different needs of organizations, and specifically organizations in transitions or planning. So coming back to this role, there was a lot of insights from our 29 years, anecdotal, sometimes just from the statistics, from the data, from all the searches we've done, from all the plannings we've done, from all the even mergers, transitions, all that. There was a lot of data there. And also in my first 6 months, I did a lot of listening sessions. It wasn't part of a research. It was just informal conversations with clients, with candidates, with consultants, even from different firms, and just to just hear their perspective on where we're at. And this question kept coming up. What actually happens to a leader or an organization after a transition? This is one of the questions. There are many questions, and you'll see, at ACG, we launched Ascend by ACG, which was for the middle managers. That came as a response to things I've heard in the listening sessions about the people who are getting ready for the next steps. And that's co-facilitated with our senior advisor, Laura Zucker. And Emil, who's on your advisory committee as well, is a senior advisor with ACG and is part of that program as well. But everything we've been doing with ACG is just a response to what I heard and what we heard in this, because we're going through our own leadership transition and listening and responding when we can, or investigating more sometimes with other questions. But that was one of the questions. So there's a lot, the whole point to say there's a lot of questions, but that was one of the questions, like how do we what happens after the hire? Okay, after the announcement and the congratulations, then what? That's when the real work. So when we talked, I think I've been thinking about that with my colleagues at the firm. And then when we talked and you were already in that question, already doing the interviews, it was a no-brainer to say, okay, let's do this research together and put data behind it. So it's not just anecdotal thoughts or experiences, which is very important. But also let's see what people will say if we ask them those questions directly.
Well, and I think what I really appreciated was like when you said yes, it felt like I had an institutional partner bringing credibility to this work at a time when a lot of people are backing away from equity conversations, right? Like my research is not just about who is success, but how do we reimagine who is set up for success in these seats? Like, I think it's important to name that, post George Floyd, we've seen a lot of leaders, especially women and leaders of color, be put into positions and then not given the conditions around them where they can really be successful. And so I'm grateful that ACG was willing to partner, willing to go there, because I think we've asked some very specific identity-based questions to learn how the cost of these transitions land with different folks.
Yeah, definitely. And as a woman, I mean, I didn't go into my personal story, but as a woman of color myself, immigrant, getting to this position, there's a lot of things that I can personally relate to as well. But I think it's important. And for me, even with ACG, I think it's just important to keep learning and to keep getting better. For me, it's not about statements or what we put on the website. It's more about how we're doing the work. And it's just part of the work. It's just part of what we do. So it wasn't, I think we were doing it. It's like, we didn't like, this is who we are, regardless of what's going outside. This is who we are by actions, not by statements that get put out whenever.
Well, and I think that's an important thing that connects us. Like, you and I are also both coaches, right? And so yes. I think we agree that leadership is not something that you like get to. You're constantly evolving and growing as a leader, and this continuous learning in the sector is needed now more than ever, especially in the age of AI, right? Yes. And so I think we all have a responsibility to embed this like learning growth mindset, now more than ever.
And openness
and curiosity.
The right answers. I mean, on all those LinkedIn Live Arts Insights Lives, I've been coming, whether me or whoever from the team is hosting it, with we don't have the answers, but we're here to talk and figure out. And there might be more than one answer, and two truths may exist at the same time. So it's about that. And actually, that's something that even now in leadership transitions is it's the top skill, actually, that we've seen from our work. It's not sometimes the direct experience, but it's the potential and the adaptability and being able to grow and learn and evolve with the role, rather than just the resume. It's beyond the resume in a way, which brings me to our first finding that we're going to talk about today. And as I said to everybody, we decided to reopen the survey. So make sure, if you haven't taken the survey, to take it. It will be in the chat. The link will be there, or share it with folks, because the more we can get people to take it, the bigger our sample is. But for our preliminary findings, based on the sample we have as of today, there was a big one about first-time CEOs. So I don't know, Courtney, if you want to share a little bit about the statistics of that, and then we can dive into it.
Yeah, so from the sample that we had, we learned that nearly 60% of incoming CEOs or executive directors were in the seat for the very first time. And I think not only was that stat surprising, but also when you looked at larger organizations, those with budgets of 25 million or more, that actually climbed higher, and we acknowledge we want to get a bigger sample size there, but I think most organizations that I spoke with that wanted to hire a new ED or CEO at very large places sometimes result to wanting to find somebody that's already been in the seat before. So, I hope that this stat is helpful both for executive search firms and for committees to, help reimagine who you're thinking about for those kinds of roles. But I'm curious, Nagam, like, how did that resonate with you and your team? Were you surprised by that? Are you seeing that in the field?
No, because we're seeing that as well. I mean, we still have, there are some, I mean, it's mixed. There are some search committees or organizations that want somebody who's done the exact job, but it's evolving now where there are people who are this first CEOs. It's happening a lot, but I think it comes down with us is just that readiness and that assessment even before we start the search about where the organization is at and what is needed and what's working and what's not working and how is this person going to fill the gaps, and based on that, really understanding what are the top things we're looking for in candidates. Is it that they've done the exact same job, or they've fundraised the same amount of money, or like supervised the same number of staff, or is it that they have a different kind of experience? So all that, we look at the assessment or pre-search in a way. We do that work to be able to find the right candidates. But yeah, that's something that we're seeing, that first-time CEOs are getting tapped in a way. And then the other thing is like that, as I said earlier, it's beyond just now the resume or the exact same job, because the whole sector is evolving and roles are evolving. Like right now, you expect the CFO to also influence the culture and the people. You expect the program manager to also has some involvement in fundraising. So like the roles are evolving in a way where it's, I mean, when we say exact same job, what is the exact same job? Like, because even that job 5 years ago is very different than the job today. So there's a lot of nuances and complexity there.
And I think, combining that with sector turnover stats, I read something yesterday that said that 92% of arts and culture employees expect to leave their job in the next 2 years. And so, I mean, that's like a glaring red flag that, something is happening, and, leaders set the weather for the organization. And so I think there is a moment to think a little bit more creatively about how we're using this opportunity to really set everyone up for success long term. Right.
Another thing that I've read and we've seen also, I mean, anecdotally, I guess, that there's a lot of also candidates or potential people that can become the leader. They don't want that job.
Correct.
They don't want to be the CEO, which is very different than maybe 10, 20 years ago, where everybody worked really hard and did everything they can because they wanted that job. And it's very different. It's a very different setting right now.
And I would add, because the majority of the people that I interviewed identified as being historically underrepresented. So I spoke with many women, many LGBTQ executives, many leaders of color, and more. And, something that I heard from a lot of them is that, not only do they not want those jobs, but sometimes those roles don't feel like safe spaces for them. Right. And so, again, how do we create better conditions for the kinds of leaders that we aspire to have, to be more representative of our communities? Because I think that's something that we all need to continue striving and pushing for in our sector.
And that's such an important point, even as for us and for me, this is very important. And I mean, I said it when I shared our post about this live, is that even as a search firm, it's not a checklist about only filling the position. It's about making sure the organizations and the leaders are supported and successful. And so even the executive search is evolving, and the process is about that goal in mind, rather than just like matching the person to the role and okay, bye bye. It's like, well, how does the organization and that leader succeed? And that comes from setting the right environment and also supporting the leaders. Before going into what support structures and success outcomes may look like, and looking at the data for that specific, and again, there were so many questions. You'll see it if you open the link and take the survey. We reopening it, but we are just focusing on two big titles today in our live, but hopefully when we close it again, we'll have a full-on report with all the findings, and maybe we do another LinkedIn Live and we'll focus on another findings. And it's going to be interesting to see if the bigger sample validate the same trends or if something else emerges. But before we go to the support structure, what is one thing you would tell a first-time leader before day one?
You know, I would try to get to them before day one so that we're part of the negotiation process too, because, you know, I think a lot of us, especially those of us who have worked in the sector for a long time, sometimes we idealize getting this top job. Like it's something we've dreamed about for our entire careers. And then when it's finally offered, we're like, oh, we've been chosen. But it is so important to ensure that you are setting yourself up for success in these roles. So, you know, what kind of support has the board offered you? What does onboarding look like? Is there PR support or a coach, or, you know, how engaged is the leadership team? How can we ensure the stickiness of the leader? You know, I think it's really important to listen before you act too. You know, this idea of really understanding the culture, the context, the problem to be solved. You know, every leader that I spoke with said that there was a difference between the job they were sold on and the job that actually was to be done, right? And, you know, that's because boards are volunteers. Sometimes they don't know the ins and outs and the nitty-gritty of what's actually needed. But I think all too often we're seeing leaders enter roles and realizing, oh my goodness, there's a huge financial crisis, or there are lawsuits or labor issues that I really wasn't aware of that are actually becoming a huge part of this role. And so I think it's really important to understand what is the real job and not just assume you knew what it was going in.
Yeah, this is a great point, and I think there's a responsibility on search firms as well, us included, and we take this very seriously, is to make sure, I mean, as to the best of our ability, to portray the job that is not a big gap when the person starts, whether we, with our pre-assessment work, pre-search work, really digging deep and asking the questions, or throughout the interviews in our process, like we share the truths we know in a way, so then the candidate can be prepared, because again, the goal is for them to be successful, not just to take the role. But another tip is also, a lot of sometimes organizations want to do the search themselves, and that's fine, but there's blind spots, to your point earlier about it's not intentional, but there's blind spots, and that's why it's always good to have an external, neutral, objective party that's running the search, because then you can tell the organization some things if they need to hear it, and then you can be in the middle of that. The other thing I wanted to uplift, you said the listening. A lot of times this is an answer that maybe everybody says, like listening the first 90 days, but it's about actually listening, like actually doing it, because it takes a lot of humility and also holding back to just listen and to hear the context and learn everything before you bring the answers.
Well, and I think part of that listening is power mapping too, because, you know, you think you know who your boss is, you think it's the board chair, but then you understand that there are actually different actors that really have significant influence over things. So it's really understanding the whole landscape and how decisions are actually made at the organization.
Right. So transitions, like how can we support those incoming CEOs, whether they're the first time or not first time, or anybody in the C-suite, doesn't have to be even CEOs. And that's something we're excited. Courtney and I, we're going to announce soon a program we're working about together on that's more in the transition support. It's not ready to be announced yet, but if you want to hear more, if you can DM ACG, yes, or put it in the comments, yes, or more, and we'll make sure to add you to that email list, because it's going to be a very, I don't know if we're still thinking how if it's going to be a public thing or just reaching out to specific clients. But if you're interested in hearing more about that program, and it's more about the transition, the support for the candidates after they get placed. But talking about that, so the data from our survey right now, the preliminary results, leaders who got both structured onboarding and coaching rated their transition successful 78% of the time, and versus 40% for leaders who got neither. And actually, based on the sample we have, only 13% had actual access to a truly comprehensive onboarding process. Thus, hint, hint, the program we're working on. but that is amazing, especially today. Like I wasn't surprised as I see it, but at the same time, I didn't know it's that low. Like 13% is a very low number. What are your thoughts about that? And did it come up in your interviews as well?
100%. I think that I've been interested in what are these scalable solutions that help all leaders thrive. I think especially those of us who maybe haven't grown up with the social capital or visibility that some other leaders in the sector do. And I think this is a resounding answer. Like, what would it look like to normalize onboarding and coaching for all leaders, knowing that the success rate is nearly 80%? I think that's huge. I'll tell a story from the research that was, one of the most heartbreaking stories that I heard. I spoke with a leader of color at a large arts organization who, went through a search process. And after she secured the job, the board just basically wiped their hands clean. We did our job. Here's the leader. Now go do it. And this is a leader who had no onboarding, who had to write her own press release. Even though it was a marketing and comms team, she had to write her own press release. She had to plan her own welcome party, right? And
Okay.
these are very simple things that I think board members can do to extend the length of a leader. And I think many of them would be willing to do it if we as a field just kind of told them how they can be helpful. I think we're evolving away from this command and control style of leadership that many of us grew up in. And, now it takes a village, it takes a collective approach to do this, right? Leadership can be so isolating, especially if you're a first-time CEO trying to navigate this and trying to put on a confident front, like you got this and everything's under control. So there's just a lot of factors that I think go into this, but onboarding and coaching together can be very powerful.
And also, especially, just to add to your point earlier, especially is if you don't look like the stereotypical leader. I mean, lived experience here, but like there's also things that you need to navigate in addition to everything else, because you're not the typical, you don't look like, or you don't act like, or you don't sound like the stereotypical kind of leader. But those are things that are real and actually have impact on people. Mm-hmm. And how do we support? To your point about like even supporting boards as much as the same way as leaders, because it's not, I'm sure boards who volunteer to be boards, and it's because of passion, because they love the mission, they want to be part of it. It's not because they want to do anything that's hurtful, but still intent, impact, and there's an opportunity, there's a gap maybe there, and we get to look at that and be honest with ourselves. That's why specifically with our searches, for example, at the end, once it gets announced, it's included in the search process, as we have some team team building, some transition support, something that's not extensive. Now there's a transition process as well that we do, and it's after the search, there's a transition process for a year. But even within the search, there was a couple months of transition support just to get over the hump with us being a neutral player in that. And with the transition process, it takes, like in searches, we have search committees, and planning and strategic planning and facility planning. We always have a committee. We believe in committees because it's diverse voices and it's not just with one person, as much as possible to have that in the processes with transitions as well. And I know we talked about that offline before we joined live, but having a transition committee, and it can be the same as the search committee. Maybe some members may leave and new members come, but this is the transition committee for a certain time with a specific charge in a way to make sure the new leader is successful. And on our side as a firm, it's also how to support with that, whether the executive coaching or for example, the program we're building together on the side. So then the leader is not alone and they can have a network of other leaders, but also have access to coaching and advising, but also support for the board and for different players within that year on what does onboarding look like? What are some critical things that need to happen in those first period or specific timelines? So this is all not new, but we've never paid attention, not us as a firm, as an industry, as a sector. It's like usually the search, and that's the most important, but it's as important the transition comes after.
And I think that there are two sides of this that are important. There's like the pre-search side of, again, who are we imagining into those roles, and how are we helping historically underrepresented leaders, especially build their visibility and capital so that their names are included in those spaces. But then on the flip side, how do we normalize what support looks like instead of just saying we've done our job, the leader is here? You know, you talked about transition committees, and there was one board member that I spoke with who acknowledged that their transition committee's job wasn't done until their leader successfully completed their first year performance evaluation. Like that's the attitude and mindset that I think I would love to normalize sector-wide. Right. I think that's how you set people up for success.
Well, we will normalize it.
Yes, we will.
Awesome. Well, I know we're getting at our time, but anything else to add on structures? I think we covered a lot of bases here, but as a reminder, just for everybody, I'm going to say it one last time. Courtney and I are building that's why she's now ACG collaborator. We're building this program together. So if you want to hear more about that, but also if you want to talk to us or anything interest in what we're talking about today, just put yes in the comments or DM us, and somebody from the ACG team will reach out and move you along to the next steps with that. And also, if you haven't taken the survey yet, or if you've taken it, the link is in the comments. Please take it. Please share it to as many leaders, board members, even team members. It has a question that identifies where every role is so that we can filter it on our side. So please help us spread the word so we can get a bigger sample. Courtney, before we wrap up, if there's one thing you want everybody watching today to take from this research, what would it be?
I would love to have everyone reflect on, who are you imagining into leadership? And who should you be doing that for? Because those of us in positions of power, I think, have a responsibility to play in providing folks with support, especially those who are less recognized and visible in the field. So would love to encourage everyone to think about how you can do more of that for leaders that are under your care.
That's amazing. For me, it would be that it's going to take all of us. I mean, that's why at ACG, we're open even to collaborations. We're doing this together. We're doing other things. I think it's going to take all of us from where we're sitting, from where we're at, with whatever capacity we have. You know that quote, do what you can with what you have until you have something else, to normalize the things we're talking about. So we stop talking about it and it becomes a thing. So that's one thing I want anybody who's watching or who's going to look at the research later to take away and sign up and get involved in a way or another. Any last words?
Just thank you. I think this is really a collective effort. This isn't me doing this research. It's guided by a committee. It's informed by so many voices. And I think this kind of field change requires so many actors, pushing this, both with funders, with boards, with search firms. So I think, again, if you're interested in this work, let us know. We'd love to chat with you and hear your story, hear your ideas for how to help normalize these things in the sector.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. And thank you for even thinking of ACG and coming to us and also saying yes to a collaboration with us, because it's a two-way street and I'm excited about that. Thank you for those of you who already took the survey. Thank you for those of you who were watching today. If you're watching this recording later and you have other questions or you can always write in the chat. We'll always look at the chat, even if it's a recording. So we'd love to hear from you if there's any questions or additional thoughts about this subject. I think to be continued. I think we're going to have another conversation probably as we close the survey again with a bigger sample. We're going to have a report so you all have that data with you and can use it in whatever conversations or however you need to use it. But thank you, Courtney, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for watching and joining us today. And we'll see you at the next Arts Insights Live in a couple weeks. Have a great day.
Thank you.